Welcome to the Up Arrow Podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, I'm William Harris. I'm the founder and CEO of Element and the host of the Up Arrow Podcast, where I feature the best minds in e-commerce to help you scale from 10 million to 100 million and beyond as you up arrow your business and your personal life. Joining me today is Andrew Youderian. He left his corporate job in 2008 to dive into e-commerce full-time and hasn't looked back. He started multiple e-commerce businesses and now is the founder and owner of eCommerceFuel, the world's premier community for 7- and 8-figure store owners. And I'll say that I have a lot of customers in eCommerceFuel and several that have had nice exits. It's a fantastic community. His mission is to help them both build incredible businesses and equally amazing personal and fulfilling lives. Andrew, long time coming. Excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate the invite and excited to geek out about some stuff. And congrats on the podcast. I know it's not new, but newish, and was checking out some of your past episodes, and you're doing a great job with it. So well done.
Well, yeah, I've got you as inspiration. I try to keep it on top of what's going on. It's only natural to do that, right? And I think we've cracked into the top 5% now if we look at like listen notes. And you're in like the top 0.5%. I mean, like you've done a great job building yours. So
thanks, man. It's a lot of ups and downs, but appreciate it. It's been fun.
Sure. Yeah. I was trying to think about how we first got connected, and I don't remember how we first met for sure. We were talking about this even a little bit yesterday, but I believe I had you write a guest post on Sellbrite way back in like 2014, way before they were acquired by GoDaddy. And then in person, we met, I believe it was like at an after party at IRCE back in like 2015. I mean, this is before Shopify even had a 10 by 10 booth at IRCE. Like this was the early days of Shopify Plus and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun. But I think we met up at like an eCommerceFuel event there. I was invited as a guest. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was like a decade ago. It's digging deep for that one when Shopify was the underdog, upstart, scrappy competitor kind of. Yeah,
yes.
Those are fun days. I mean, this is still a lot of fun too, but those were super fun days.
Yeah, I have to imagine when you were running eComFuel, like it's like I don't know if Shopify was like as dominant at the time when you started it back then, because I know I think it was 2015 when I launched. I helped bring an e-commerce store from Magento over to Shopify Plus, and they had like 70,000 SKUs at the time. And there was a lot of things that we had to like work on almost custom doing with that. And I remember people just being like, what are you doing? Like Shopify is for small stores. Like you're making the biggest mistake. Like this is a terrible, I'm like, no. I really feel good about this decision. Wrote about this, a blog post about this, and it got a lot of attention. The C-suite of Magento had me on the phone. They were like, let's talk about what you just wrote here. Like we obviously don't like it that much, but I mean, this was like, it was very, I don't know, like this was not the way to do things back then. Right.
No, I hear you. Shopify have a lot of affinity for them and respect for them because they were back in, I mean, this was probably 2012 or 2013. It's 2012 and 13, sure. But they helped, they probably built half of my email list. And when I say they built, I got partnered up with them. I kind of stalked the head of the blog over there. His name was Mark Hayes at the time, a really great guy. And somehow, convinced him to let me do a bunch of guest posting for Shopify. And then that ended up driving a ton of traffic to eCommerceFuel. And so they were instrumental in helping help me get that brand off the ground. And then same with you. I was on Magento for a while. And if you're on Magento, like I bet there's a couple of therapists in the United States that specialize in helping people who are on Magento for more than 6 months. It was just, it was awful. And so same thing, I jumped ship, went to Shopify, did a big write-up about it in partnership with, anyway, all to say, it was fun days and it was fun when Shopify, still is fun, but it's especially cool when they were kind of young and on the upswing.
Totally. Well, today we're going to be talking about building wealth, winning in e-commerce, and finding peace. Before we do, I want to announce our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with one that sold for nearly $800 million and one that IPO'd. You can learn more on our website at element.com, which is spelled ELUMYNT.com. That said, on to the good stuff. I want to start off here because the bulk of the podcast, what we usually talk about is, and I even mentioned this in the intro, scaling from 10 million to 100 million and beyond. But what's the problem with the goal of getting acquired for 9 figures?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing. It depends what you want out of life, right? Like, and I think you get acquired for nine figures, assuming you own a big chunk of that equity and the payout works, and it's a great outcome. I think it just depends on what do you have to trade to get there, right? And I think we were talking recently about how I think there's kind of 3 big financial milestones in life, where like you go from not, let's say 0 to maybe, not having to worry about money from a bill basis, or you've got a regular income coming in, maybe a little bit tucked away, an emergency fund. Money is not a pressing issue every day for you. Mm-hmm. That's a great step up from the step before. The next one is like, let's say the next big one is say financial freedom. You've got enough assets and investments to cover your monthly burn. And so you can pick and choose, you can work or not work, but largely a lot of people, entrepreneurs that are able to do that, can then switch from saying, what do I have to do to what do I want to do for work? And then the third one is probably like, hey, let's ball out, let's rent jets, let's get the bling bling, let's go hang out with Durant and buy the, and like that step up is A, dramatically larger in terms of what you need to get there. And B, I would say it's probably the least gratifying from a just sense of security, safety, and well-being and happiness level of those 3 jumps. So all that to say, you can sell for 9 figures, make a bunch of money, but anyone I know who has done that has probably, I don't want to say mortgaged 5 to 10 years of their life, but it has been all consuming and almost certainly has made some very noticeable trade-offs for that. And so I think the question is, if that's really important to you, great. But I think for a lot of people, it's not necessarily what it's cracked up to be for the trade-offs.
Yeah, that's fair. You were telling me about the book, The Psychology of Money, Stop Moving Your Goalposts. What does that mean?
Yeah. So if anyone has not read The Psychology of Money, it's the number one book I recommend. I have a business background, got a degree in finance, worked in banking. I feel like I understand that world reasonably well, have read a lot of books in the finance realm, and it's by far the best finance and investing book I've ever read. And probably the biggest thing I took away from that is the guy Morgan Housel who wrote it. He says the hardest thing to do in finance and in investing and wealth building is to stop moving your goalposts, meaning it's to stop increasing the amount of money you think you need. He says it happens to almost everybody, and it's the thing that keeps people making suboptimal decisions for a really long time. So that's, and I see that happen. I've seen that happen in my life. I've seen it happen in other people's life. And I think if you can, I gave a talk to some business students recently, and one of the things I recommended to them, even though it was completely apart from the topic at hand, was you're going out, you're ambitious, try not to do this. Give yourself the ability to double pick a number that you think is your number. It's always an interesting a question to ask people. How much you need to be happy? How much is enough? Double that once, and then don't move on past that. And if you can do that, you'll be in pretty good shape, at least better shape than a lot of other people in terms of chasing stuff. So,
yeah, that's a tough thing, right? Because it's you go from one of those levels to the next level, and you're not necessarily living any differently. It's just maybe instead of eating ramen, you're eating a little bit better noodles. Instead of that one house, you've got one more bedroom, one more bathroom. I mean, it can seem like it's not that much of a change sometimes, and I can see how that can sneak up on you.
Oh, totally. And I mean, we live America. I love America. We have some issues, but I have a lot of love for our country.
Totally.
But we're also, you have some of the smartest people in the world constantly telling you, and that's kind of, sometimes I'm honest, being in the e-commerce industry, that's kind of what you do as marketers as well. You're trying to convince people that their life is not going to be full and complete and happy unless they buy what you have to offer. And sometimes that's true. A lot of times it's not true. But you've got an insane number of people trying to part you with your money and with your time, really is what they're trying to part you with. And so a lot of times it's very easy to spend too much time optimizing for the wrong thing in life. And so I think that's what it boils down to. And I also think a lot of entrepreneurs will start out and have a hard time changing gears, right? Like they start because you need to bust it. You need to hustle. You really need to work hard to build up that foundation, to build a business. And I do think, financial stability, financial freedom is a very important and great thing to aspire toward. But it is so difficult to take that mindset and switch gears once you achieve that to get to a point where you can say, okay, I can let off the gas a little bit. I'm going to invest in these other areas of my life because they've maybe been neglected for a little while, and I really need to invest over here. And the incremental trade-offs for more money are not worth the areas I'm shortchanging in my life. And so I think that's something as I grow as an entrepreneur, as I see other entrepreneurs grow, I'm increasingly more interested in and trying to talk about more because I think it's so important. I think it's such a hard shift to make.
Yeah. How do we make this a reality? Like if this was if that was the problem is potentially saying I'm not going to be happy and successful unless I have that 9-figure exit. Like you said, there's nothing wrong with it, but oftentimes it's the mentality of getting there. What's the solution? How do we fix that?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you tell yourself you can't be happy without a 9-figure exit,
sure,
you're never going to be happy. A 9-figure exit isn't going to make you happy. That's insane, right?
Right.
And so I think the first part of that is saying like, okay, coming to terms with this is not going to make me happy, and so what is I'm trying to optimize for? And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are optimizing for. Some are optimizing for freedom. I think they have an easier time making that transition. I think some are optimizing for ego, for proving people, for kind of proving people wrong, making a dent in the universe. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's kind of a concept, I'm stealing this from someone, but like clean fuel versus dirty fuel. And I can't remember who said that. It's not mine, but I think that's a good way to think about it. Like if you think your 9-figure exit is going to be the thing that makes you happy, like I talked about with those 3 tiers, almost every quantifiably 99% of people who get into that upper echelon aren't going to be any happier than they were when they just had, enough to cover their basic stuff. So I think the first part of that whole process, like you said, is just saying, it's not going to make you happy. And so I think doesn't mean that's a bad thing to go for. If, maybe you want to do it because you love the game, because you want to make a big impact in the world, but just not lying to yourself about it.
Yeah. It's very easy to lie to yourself about it, isn't it? We lie to ourselves about all kinds of things. And I think being able to look at like the root of what it is that you actually want. I do this with my daughters even too, right there. I've got 14, 11 and 9-year-old. And, maybe there's something that they're aspiring to. And it's like, those are good aspirations, but like asking them questions to get to the root of it's like, what is it that you actually want in this? And I think that we say this even as businesses, right? Where it's like, hey, our goal is to be able to get to 10 million. You want 10 million? In 2 million in EBITDA, or do you actually want 5 million and 4 million in EBITDA, right? Like which one do you actually want? And that's obviously a wild scenario, but the idea it's like, wait a minute, what do you really want? Do you want the revenue? Do you want the profit? Okay, so let's work backwards a little bit and kind of figure out like what those root goals are.
Yeah, and I actually think a little bit going down that road, I actually think it's so we lie to ourselves all the time, like you said. Mm-hmm. I think what a lot of people think they want is a massive exit where they can go, bling bling out with Kevin Durant, right? Like, and cash in the bank. I think that's what entrepreneurs think they want. I think when often of them get it, it leads them down to a path of unfulfillment and a lot of a lot of unfulfillment and kind of surprise. I think what most entrepreneurs would be much better served by is a business that they, for the most part, enjoyed doing, believed in, could run for a medium to long-term period and produced, meaningful financial results for them. Like, I think that is something, because what do you hear so often when somebody sells a business, right? Like the trope is you hang out on a beach for 6 months, 12 months, you golf, you go a little crazy, and then you go start something else, right? Like you're just going back to the beginning. Right. And so, I mean, there's a lot of validity if you are going from not secure financially to secure financially with an exit. Like that's a meaningful, I think a meaningful reason to sell a business. There's also some level of credibility that comes with that. And so I don't want to take away from those. But the incrementality of going from that to double, triple, quadruple, just to pad your bank account, I think a lot of people don't think hard enough about the trade-offs there.
I had an article that I wrote on Entrepreneur, and I think it's still posted there, but I wrote it a few years ago, said, don't be like Elon Musk when you take your last breath. And this is before Elon like really catapulted to where he's at now. And I want to clarify, I'm a big Elon fan. I think that he's done incredible work. He is at the forefront of some of the most impressive stuff that's going on within our country and within the world, technologically wise. But for most people, they don't. And what I think he's now worth more than both Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, right? I mean, like fantastic. But most people, this isn't what they actually want. Most people who get to the end of their life aren't going to say like, man, I really wish I would have worked harder. I really wish I would have spent less time with my family. I really, you know what I mean? That's not the thing that you say on your deathbed. And to your point, it's like, if you can evaluate that from that perspective, it's like, what do I want? Maybe then you can start to align what you do with the actual goals and values that you have in life.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Like one kind of framework I like to use if I find myself being envious or jealous about someone is, would I trade places with them? Because it's very easy to cherry pick and be like, I want their athleticism, I want their business or their portfolio or whatever it is. But I think you can't do that. Like, that's not how life works. And so I think the better question is, would I trade places with this other person in their entirety? And like for Elon Musk, there's no way I would trade places with him. One, from a stress perspective. Two, I don't know. I'm not part of his family. I imagine it would be difficult to be a great father to like 10 kids working 100 hours a week, right? Like I struggle to be a great father, or at least try to 3 kids working significantly less than that. So, and you just take all of the stuff that is on his plate. Anyway, all that said, I think that's always an interesting exercise when you're finding yourself, being envious.
Yeah. So I want to get into other practical ideas. One of the other ideas that you had told me about was like the balance sheet of your life, or whatever this was, right? So it's like not the balance sheet of your finances, but the balance sheet of your life. Like, how do you go about starting to figure these things out?
Are you sure this was me that was talking about the balance sheet?
It might not have been you. It might have been something I listened on a podcast and heard. And so then maybe I'll go ahead and say that. Like, the way that I've heard it said was something along the lines of just like being able to say, it's like, what are those things that you at least find values and goals on? And it's like, where are those buckets depleted, right? And so it's like, if you say, yeah, I value financial security, that's one of the buckets that you value. But you're also saying, I value being a good father, and I value being a good husband. I value, being involved in my community. I value going to church, whatever these things are that you're saying. And you look at that and you're like, well, I've filled up this balance sheet very, very well, but these ones are, down to 0 or negative. Then you can start looking at this and saying, I need to make some adjustments because I'm not pouring back into the right areas that I want to within life.
Yeah. And I think you can't be everything all the time, right? And I think people are mostly familiar with the buckets, right? You've got like financial, relational, spiritual, health. Those are kind of the 4 big ones, right? And I think it's very rare you have all those balanced. Like when you're young, I'm a big proponent of working your butt off in your 20s. I think the 20s is such a defining moment. Like, you have an airplane, right? And you get an airplane in a 5-hour journey off by a degree or 2, and they end up radically off course. Or vice versa, you stay on track and you don't have to, you don't have emergencies. You can land at the airport fine. Things are good. I think your 20s are a great time to sacrifice and hustle and bust it. Maybe at the expense a little bit of your health, because your health can probably, take it a little bit more. Maybe a little bit at the expense of some of your relationships if they're strong. But then, you get into like your 30s and 40s and further on. I think that's a great time, especially if you have been busting it for 10 or 15 years and seen some fruit, to start shifting and start investing, because your health is, probably going to be, it's a little more important. You start taking it seriously. Your relationships, you let those, go on too long. If you got a marriage and you neglect it for too long, like that's, so I think you always have to be cognizant of where you're running short and reinvest appropriately. So there's a lot we could talk about there, but I think it's very rare that you get them all. Maybe when you're like, 50s, 60s financially set, you can start really investing in those equally. But even then, I would say that on the finance side, you're going to be, and the business side, you're probably investing less if you're reprioritizing your time into those other areas.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to recognize that there are seasons is an important part of this too, right?
Totally.
It's like, what season are you in life? What season are you in to make sure that you're appropriate? And even week to week, right? I forget who it was. Somebody on the podcast had something good that they said along those lines, which is, even letting their wife know that it's like, hey, this week I'm going to be prioritizing this, and this. I might be like not the best dad this week, but next week I'm going to be, at these games, I'm going to be doing these things. And so I might not be the best worker this week. And just trying to work through that and saying it's like you do have to kind of pick and choose sometimes. And at least if you're upfront and honest about it, that helps both you and those around you to understand, headspace wise where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great point.
You said something about this. This is completely tangential, but I can't let it go. You talked about being off by like a half a degree in an airplane. I don't know if you know this, and I could be wrong exactly on the exact number. Somebody can fact check me on this, but I memorized pi out to like 59 digits on my way to work one time. It's just driving to work, and I was like, okay, great. I'm going to memorize pi.
Totally normal. Totally normal.
It's a very normal thing, right? A lot of us do this, and one of the things that I learned after the fact, though, is that if you can calculate roughly the circumference of the observable universe to within the width of one hydrogen atom, which is about all the more accuracy you need with only 38 digits of pi. So 59 is completely unnecessary amount of digits of pi.
Wait, what do you mean you can calculate the circumference of the universe with that many digits
of the observable universe?
So you're saying it's that degree of accuracy, of precision with pi lets you get close enough with hundreds of millions of light years to become almost exact. Wow, that's interesting.
Right. Which doesn't feel intuitive, but I had to look it up, and I was like, yeah, I could be wrong. Maybe it's 38, 39. I don't remember exactly where it was like, yeah, significantly less than what I memorized.
Wow. Well, man, now my wife and I have something to talk about at date night tonight. Well,
you can let her know you're welcome.
Date night ever. You're like, baby, I guess you're not going to believe what I learned today.
That's so good.
She's going to come slide does she over like next that, to me.
Like, or is she like, no, this is the dumbest topic?
Oh, dude, on Valentine's Day, I just read math equations and theorems to her. And she goes, she's kind of unique in that way. She's wildly erotic. So
I can't tell if you're serious or joking right now.
No, I'm totally messing with you.
When I was in high school, I wrote a poem for the girl sitting next to me in science class. We were learning about the different uranium isotopes and stuff like that. And I said, hey, I'm uranium-235, you're uranium-238. What do you say we get together and radioactively date? And she laughed and was like, no. So it does not work for most girls.
I'm guessing that's not who you ended up with.
No, but I would say my wife would be equally as unimpressed. So
that's awesome.
I want to chat through then some of the practical things of where we think e-commerce is going. You have a group of over 1,500 companies now or whatever that are in this group. I mean, a significant amount here. You see a lot of trends. What do you think about the future of e-commerce and where it's at?
Yeah, so eCommerceFuel, it's a community we have about 1,100 7 and 8 figure store owners, and it's a community where those vetted store owners learn from each other, share what's working, what's not, et cetera. I would say, you look at some of the trends from the last year or two, and I don't think any of these will surprise people. I think maybe the conversation might be a little more interesting or at least newer for people when we talk about where e-commerce is going. But big trends I'm seeing are acquisition is getting harder and harder, right? Like it's just tough to squeeze it out, even with people who do it well. With Google and Amazon and Meta, of course. A lot of competition from places like on the low end, like Temu and Shein, and even from just direct factories selling directly into the United States, either through FBA or just operating 3PLs or even their own warehouses. A lot of competition coming in that way. And I think it's just e-commerce has matured a lot and become much more difficult over the last 2 to 3 years, and particularly the last 18 months. So that's kind of the trend I'm seeing. And I think from a product perspective too, you're kind of in the world where if you could figure out distribution early on, you could win. And then if you had a private label and could figure out manufacturing, you could win. And then if you had your own brand that you actually built some proprietary stuff around, you could win. And now I think the bar for even having your own brand, it's got to be a pretty compelling product, and you've got to be a good marketer as well. So that's where I think we are in some of the trends I'm seeing. And I'm not sure if you want to dive more into those or maybe talk about where we think e-commerce is going in the next few years.
Let's dive into those, and then we'll get into like where it's going. Because I agree with you. I feel like the barrier to entry has never been easier, but the barrier to succeed has never been harder in at least the D2C space, which is where I spend more of my time than I would. And I can't really say much for drop shipping, but I see a lot less drop shipping videos on TikTok of people just going, this. So I assume that maybe they're just, giving up on that a little bit too. But So if you were going to dig into how do we correct some of these areas or how do we fix some of these areas, what are some tips that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with maybe brand
Okay.
and marketing. I think I have this concept that I kind of dub smaller, more durable brands. And so if you look at the brands that were built quickly over the last 5 years, not all, but most of them were built on the backs of cheap traffic or cheaper traffic especially from Meta. And I think that is becoming so much harder to do that I think we've almost come full circle. And I think the brands that are going to win in the future are going to stay smaller. They're going to kind of win the old-fashioned way. Interesting, great products, more of a specialty, more of a personality, more of a real connection with customers through great service, through unique marketing, through superior product innovation. And yes, they will market, but they'll win a lot of their market share slowly over time the old-fashioned way, but it will be stronger, it will be stickier. And so hence smaller, more durable brands will be more stable. And I think probably they'll be worth more as well because they have more of a moat. If you look at, I'm a big fan of Prof G. He does a great show. He's probably one of my favorite podcasts. And he talks frequently about how if you look at the brands that are the best in the world, they really don't rely on advertising that much. They do a little bit, but Apple doesn't, I mean, they have ad campaigns, but they don't spend that much. Netflix has ad campaigns. They don't spend that much, right? Like they mostly invest in a phenomenal product and let it speak for themselves. And if it's him or someone else, but advertising is kind of a crutch for a weak product, right? Or experience. And I think that's always been true, but I think it's never been more true than it is going forward. That's on the marketing side and brand building side. We can go deeper if you want there. I think on the supply chain side, I think you need to
for a second if that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Because I want to dig into that a little bit. So I run an advertising agency, but I couldn't agree more with you. And so because one of the things
burn the business to the ground here.
Well, no. Like, but let's say that it's a crutch oftentimes for this. It's a necessary crutch, right? It's like I think that it needs to happen, but I do think that it ends up being overinflated in terms of its importance so much that there's oftentimes, we run into, end of year or whatever, somebody's saying it's like almost entirely relying on your media team to make or break the business. And it's like that, but what else are you doing? And it's like, literally we'll sometimes have those conversations where it's like 90% of your sales volume still comes from ads. And so it's like, yes, it is make or break, but the reality is you have to do something else. And I know that there's been a really good push lately, thankfully, from others in the space. Preston Rutherford, who was one of the founders of Chubby's. I'm trying to blank on the guy's name from Airbnb now, but this idea of like a return to brand advertising and look just to say brand growth again, because I do think you're right that it was cheap traffic that built the initial D2C. It was arbitrage. It was the opportunity to do that, but that won't allow those businesses to grow in the same way. Like businesses shouldn't come in expecting the same kind of growth plan that got those businesses to where they are, but it is investing in a brand where people say, you should be having word of mouth. You should be having direct traffic. That should be in some sort of a ratio with what you're doing on paid. And you can use paid to get that out there to more places, but then you need to be able to continue to maintain that growth momentum outside of that.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think creative marketing as well too, like more interesting things that genuinely engage, that are genuinely creative, genuinely emotive. Like those things are good to spark interest and get attention.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of like when you're dating, right? Like if you roll up if a woman rolls up to some guy at a bar, I'm going to speak on behalf of women. That doesn't sound like that'll get me in trouble at all. And the guy is good looking, handsome, suave, and just has everything going for him on the outside. But 10 minutes in, you find out he's just shallow, super vain, hates his mother, and just bankrupt 4 times, morally corrupt.
Sure.
You're not going out with this guy. And I think it's the same with, advertising and the actual product, right? You got to, the advertising just gets you in the door. The product is what seals the deal, and that's got to be good.
Yeah. And that's always been true. Like you said, that's always been true. Although you were able to get away with it for a while because of how cheap the traffic was to acquire. And now it's back to the product has to be good.
Like, I'm not advertising. Every business I've ever built has been based around completely organic traffic and word of mouth. Which I don't say that with pride, because I feel like I was idiotic and gave up a ton of very, very cheap clicks. And I left a lot of money on the table because I looked at everything as a nail, because I had a hammer, and that's what I was, that was my background.
Sure.
But even still having very little background in the paid world, apart from a high level understanding of it, when people talk about like, oh yeah, I'm getting a 1.5 to 2x ROAS and so happy with that, my head explodes. And I'm just like, I mean, it depends on your economics, right? Like, I guess it can work for brands with good margins, with good repeat. But sometimes people are excited about 1.5. You know better than I do. But a lot of times the levels of return people are talking about and getting excited about, it just are kind of bewildering to me. So I don't know if
they're unsustainable.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And the reason why this is such a problem, and I would say like there's two clarifications that I'll make. One is, if you're saying that your ROAS is a 1.5 to 2, that might be completely fine, because the actual incremental value may be a 4 or a 5x MER. And part of the issue comes down to reported revenue versus actual revenue. The amount that you can actually attribute there could be very, very off. And we see this especially on a lot of top of funnel channels where Facebook is significantly, at least now, post like all the iOS 14 stuff, it's significantly underreporting usually. And so let's say that it's like, hey, 2, not good, but if it's a 2 that actually means a 4 or a 5, might be fine. But where this becomes a problem is if you do run too much on a red line there, the costs are only going to go up. The CPMs are very likely going to go up. The cost to acquire, beyond your first tier, you're at your second tier customer, your third tier, each new person starts getting a little bit more expensive to reach in terms of actually being able to draw that business. And so it does become unsustainable if you're still so reliant on that. And this is where I'd say where your paid is making up, was making up 10% of your growth. Now paid is making up 20%, 50%, 80% of your growth. When you get to that point where it's like, there has to be something else keeping up in there. Usually I would say that's an indication that you have a product problem, because you should have, if you're going out there and acquiring people, you should be able to keep up with there should be an equal amount of brand searches, direct searches, word of mouth. There should be an equal amount of other things of people wanting to get into your product through other means besides paid. And if that's not, then why aren't they talking about your product offline?
Yeah, there's a guy in our community, Jump Ventures, Leo Caracas, I think I'm getting his last name correct. He's had a very impressive track record with building his own brands, but also incubating and helping others' brands grow. And one of the biggest things he looks at is, when he's thinking about who to partner with to help try to blow them up, is product review. Like if they don't have like a 4.8, 4.9 on average for their product reviews, like exceptionally good, he's out. I think for this exact thing that we're talking about, because he knows it's really, really difficult to scale up anything that doesn't have an exceptionally good product.
Yeah. And then let's couple that with exceptionally good service, which you mentioned is customer service, right? Where it's like one of the things that you can stand out. You're not going to be able to compete with Amazon on shipping speed, typically. You're not going to compete with Amazon in breadth of products available or anything along those lines. But you can compete with Amazon on like that really intimate, like, you just walked into the corner hardware store and like Tom's going to help you figure out exactly what you need, walk you to the aisle, make sure you get the right one. And you're like, this just saves me a lot of time, a lot of effort. And by the way, I got home, it wasn't the right one. I'm back at the hardware store for some reason, but it's like, you're taken care of. Yep. Returns easy. Like, those are the things that you can at least have some kind of a competition with Amazon in.
Yeah. And the bar, I think, just, as it always does, keeps getting higher. I was talking to a really talented entrepreneur recently and in our community, and he was just saying how with his team, his customer service team, their benchmark for trying to reply to an email that comes in, to start replying to it, is 1 minute. And so hopefully they'll have a reply in like 5 minutes, and maybe even less, and I said, that's great. Like, I pushed back a little bit. I was like, 1 minute? That's crazy. He's like, well, think about it. Like, if you walked into a nice boutique and you walk around for 5 minutes and nobody helps you, you're going to walk out. And he's like, totally. A, I want to model that. And B, how awesome is it if you reply to something, if you send an email in and you have an email back in 3 minutes? Like, the signal that sends, as long as it's not a garbage email, is pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, as long as it's not a garbage email. Well, and that reminds me then of, there are some AI tools that are doing this a little bit now. There's none that I'm impressed with, but I do know that some others are in development that I think will hopefully fix this, but AI should be able to know your entire catalog, to know all of the different customer service answers, and be able to send over that immediately, right? Like an answer that is extremely thoughtful of like, I'm trying to find the right dress for my daughter's prom, whatever the thing is that you're looking for. And it's like, this is what she likes. These are her sizes, blah, blah, blah. Whatever this is, it should be able to give you excellent examples. And I do think that there's going to be, let's say, like on the agentic side, where we are going to have our own AI agents that are doing a lot of that work for us, but there will be the need for these to be, let's say, at the brand level, because you want to have as much control over that, and it's going to have obviously a lot better details about what you're doing. But what I want to see happen, and what I'd like to see happen, is get that to the point where it is real time, right? Where it's real time, and even it can like walk on and hop on a video with you, because we're seeing multimodal AI being that, where you're like, I'm thinking of the example that I have would be like a store working with RC cars, and you're like, I don't know what's wrong with my RC car, but it's making this noise. Well, through text, you have no clue whether that's good, but it's like through multimodal, it's like, here's the car, I've taken this apart, here's the thing that's making the noise, I don't know what part I need. And it's like that AI agent should be able to, like, right then and there while you're on the website, say, oh, you need this part, here it is, by the way, you can go ahead and check out, blah, blah, blah. Sweet.
I mean, man, I think the AI agents, I haven't played around with them a lot. I'm hoping to be able to do a lot more this spring. I think they're decent. I don't think they're phenomenal yet. Right. I think what you're talking about is pretty impressive. That's probably 2 or 3 years plus out to be able to take a video and digest that. But I do think 5 years out, operations, customer support, a lot of all the operational facets of a business, many of them, the majority of them, will be driven by AI in a way that makes them much simpler. And I think it's so much of what is going to allow people to succeed or not exceed is A, product quality, like we're talking about, and innovation. And then B, the ability to connect, to storytell. I think interesting lives or interesting brands and conviction are also something that I think are going to be deeply valuable. I actually think the personal brand is something that is becoming really important to have on an individual level. 10 years ago, I think a lot of people would say it's not as important. Build your brand makes it harder to sell. I think the personal brand, in the age of AI, in an age of people not connecting as much with other peers or others relationally, is only going to skyrocket in importance. So I think those are other things too that can help you build one of those smaller, more durable brands.
Yeah, I agree. So in keeping with this idea of building a smaller, more durable brand, I interrupted you before you went into, I think it was supply chain and logistics.
Oh yeah. So the other side of that, you think like, okay, well, how are we going to compete with a lot of, if you look at China just, there's a few things America makes better than China. China's expertise, China has the edge. They don't have the edge. They have a massive, huge advantage in manufacturing. They just manufacture things. And a lot of times I think people think China just manufactures a lot of junk. And there's some junk, but they also manufacture the iPhone, right? Like one of the, the highest quality pieces of electronics out there. And so when you think about building something you're going to be able to compete with China or other countries in, I think some of the things that make sense to do, or you think about, okay, what things would people want to buy? And again, I'm speaking here from like a Western country perspective. What kind of things do we have, or does the Western world or the United States specifically have an advantage in? And some things along those lines are, if there's anything that's regulated, if I'm looking for dietary supplements or anything I'm going to drink or cups or anything that's going to get into my body or I'm going to consume, I'm not buying that from Amazon unless it is from a brand that I trust deeply and know it's going to be an authentic product off of Amazon. In general, I buy it from somewhere else. Anything health related, again, same kind of thing. Anything that's in a regulated market. I think anything that has a degree of, it's going to be interesting, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on, Made in America. With the Trump administration, it's going to be very interesting to see if they actually do provide some kind of reverse tariff or bonus or tax break for Made in the USA, which could help you with margins. So I do think the universe of products that you can successfully compete in is going to narrow over the next 2-3 years. I think it has narrowed to some degree, but I do think there's some areas where you can still compete fairly well.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have a lot of good thoughts on that. I'll be honest. That's way outside of my scope of what I typically dig into. I think that the win that you have versus some type of like a reverse incentive or whatever, a reverse tariff you were calling there, or whatever. I don't know if it's even necessary, but I don't know, right? Like that's literally outside of my purview. But I do think that there should be some sort of a benefit now to people being able to manufacture in America, or even like you see with the iPhone, assembled in America. You know, as much as you can, if you can use that in some way. I do think that that's still a powerful selling feature for a lot of people, and we see that for a lot of people. I don't know if that's the thing to build a business around typically that much anymore. And I would say that other things that I feel like have gone by the wayside when I look at them as far as being something that is a differentiator that people are like, oh, I'll buy this instead of that. I don't see that being a strong one as much anymore. For older generations, yes. For younger generations, I don't think they usually seem to care, because that's why we're seeing the growth of Shin, and we're seeing, you know, Temu and people buying off of, you know, TikTok. Like, it doesn't matter. The other things that I think don't matter as much that I'm noticing would be, I don't know, environmental impact. You know, whether it should or shouldn't is completely besides the point. But I see a brand, there was a coat brand I know that really tried to go after that as being their biggest thing, even optimizing their logistics to be, you know, far and above anybody else's logistics within that space. It didn't matter enough to be able to allow them to be profitable. The product still has to be the best product, period.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I saw some research or data on, I can't remember where I saw this. Wish I could attribute it. Everyone thinks of like Tom's, right? Like they kind of pioneered the one-for-one model. And there's been a ton of other companies who have popped up, hey, with a similar model in mind, and tried to replicate that. And in general, I think statistically they did some research, and it did not help sales at all when people were looking for a product, which is kind of depressing. Yeah. I would push back on the Made in America thing a little bit. I think it depends on the demographic. I think it depends on what you're selling, sure, who you're selling to. And I think sometimes it does not matter. I think sometimes, though, it can be a powerful signal of quality. And some people just like, I think there's a demographic that definitely does look for that. So I would say if you had to pick between those two, kind of sad that, you know, the charitable aspect doesn't drive more, but I do think there is an edge for American manufacturing. I don't know if it's a massive one, but I do think that's beneficial for some buyers.
Yeah, I could get behind that. I guess I'm looking at it anecdotally, just speaking, and seeing the rise of a lot of these other, you know, Chinese things that are just taking off, and people don't seem to care, at least, you know. And I'm going to say people, I'm going to pick on the Gen Z, Gen Alpha. They're just like, oh, look at this, and it's a really good price, and I just want to buy it. And so I would say maybe that'll change as each person gets older. Then you buy enough junk, and you say, I really just want this one to last.
There's a great subreddit I came upon recently. It's called Buy It for Life. And I'm a big fan of like buying something once, ponying up, and, you know, I like the cry up front kind of approach versus the cry on the back end. Anyway, cool subreddit because they're just, I'm a big fan. We went to Japan recently, and one of the things I deeply respect about their culture is just this obsession with quality and craft, right? Like a lot of the restaurants there, they're not big. You know, we have a family of 5. We roll around, we try to get into places, and, you know, they're not big. They're built for, maybe they seat 20 people, mostly 1 and 2 tops, or bar and 2 tops. And, you know, they have the same 200, 300 people roll through every day for different meals. And they're not trying to be the next McDonald's, but they're just trying to do something exceptionally well. And I think that's cool. That. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Okay. So aside from logistics, what are some other things that we could be looking at for really building more resilient brands as they grow?
Resilient brands. I think we covered supply chain. We covered product. We covered kind of marketing. I think the other one is thinking through just operational expenses. I think AI over time will help with that. It's been a couple of years since I did this, as I'm overdue for doing my next report. But I did some research into what brands were the most successful, and what I found was that the biggest correlation was not how well they ran their advertising, wasn't even their gross margins. It was how big a chunk of overhead they had relative to the size of their business. And so the best companies were the ones that were able to stay lean and do a lot with a little. And I think that's, as you're thinking about e-commerce getting more mature, getting more competitive, I think that's going to be as important as ever. And so I think that's something we forget a lot of times, especially as you're growing. It's nice to, you feel good with more people. You feel good just throwing people at problems and money at problems, but oftentimes that's not the best long-term solution.
Both of the companies that I mentioned that I know that were in eCommerceFuel of ours that had good exits were also on EOS, also both in Minnesota. So I'm, really representing the Minnesota here, but I'm a big fan of EOS. We run on EOS here. And you really start to understand the impact that has, right? And I've heard people say that it's like, if you scale something that's inefficient, then you're scaling your inefficiencies. And to a point, if you just throw a person at a problem, you're usually creating a completely different problem. Now you're creating a people problem, and it's very quick where that can catch up to you. It can diminish the culture of what's happening. It can diminish a lot of ways, especially the communication. And so there's a really good example that I liked that EOS gave, where if you have two people communicating, there's only two ways of communication: here to here and here to here, right? And like that's it. Once you have three people communicating, that doesn't just go to three ways of communication. It's now 6 ways of communication: here to here, here to here, here to here, and back to back, right? And so the more people that you implemented this, yeah, exactly, it's significant. And so I think that, to your point, it's very quick. And we've all been probably part of a company where you ended up having somebody where it's like somebody was hired, and there maybe even wasn't like sufficient work for them to do. A good example of that would be like the tech stuff, where like there are people that are saying they're like, I was getting paid $200,000 a year at Facebook to do nothing, like to enter like one line of code a year or something. And so it's very easy for those things to catch up.
Yeah, well, I think too, apart from just the communication, it's hard to stay small from an ego standpoint. Kind of like what's one of the first questions people ask you when you're getting to know each other at networking? Oh, where are you from?
Sure.
What do you do? Oh, you do a company. How many people do you have working with you? Right, like. And the right answer is more people, larger numbers, right? I have seen companies with 50 people doing $30-40 million in sales make less money than companies that have 2 or 3 people that just have it dialed in. And it's easy to talk about employees, but I think that's a really bad metric. My company is, eCommerceFuel is 12, 13 years old. We only have like 3 or 4 employees, right? Like we could be bigger, but I've been hyper focused, partially because of what we're talking about, and partially because I want to try to not grow something too big that becomes just all consuming and pulls at other areas I want to invest in. It's you gotta be really intentional, not to know what you're trying to build. And I think it's easy to get too big too fast. It's much easier to get too big than it is to get small. It's really painful. Downsizing. So. Yeah,
for everybody, right? Which brings me to maybe a good point of another thing that you brought up before, which was conviction being like in the scarcest supply, right? Where so it's like from the founder level, then if like you want to build all these things, we could talk practically, but there has to be a mentality that you have as a founder. And why is conviction so important then?
Well, I think conviction. I think one of the things that is is going to be a real asset going forward is conviction of founders, not even necessarily within a company, although that's important, but publicly.
Sure.
Right. We're kind of coming out of it's not quite, I think it's as acute as it was a couple of years ago, but it's a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people in general didn't feel like they could really voice things that they wanted to in the world, what they believed, what they, what their opinions were. Or even just taking hard opinions. Again, going back to Prof G, I mentioned him earlier. One of the things I really admire about him is that he's I would say a left of center guy. But when he sees something on the left that he thinks is crazy, he will come out all barrels tilting and just fire away at it. Kind of condemnation be damned from whoever. You look at Bill Maher. He's someone else I really enjoy. I mean, he's on the left. I think he would call himself on a progressive journalist, but he also will tackle things on the right that he thinks that will infuriate people on the left. And that's hard to do. there's very few people in this day and age who will just speak their mind with conviction about what they believe in a respectful way, but not doing it, filtering it through what is this going to mean for other issues in my life, in my business, things like that. And I think when people hear that, myself included, it's so refreshing. It's so helpful and energizing and honest that it's wildly attractive. And so I think that if that's something that's something I'm trying to cultivate more of. And I think it's something that is just personally is important, but I think from a business perspective, it's an incredible marketing tool too.
How is that a marketing tool?
Because people want to listen to it. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why Prof G, why Bill Maher are so popular, is because you can't put him, they refuse to be put in their box. They refuse to kind of like temper their opinions when they don't fall in line with the party that they subscribe to or that they're oftentimes with, and I think, I don't think if you do it purely for marketing, I think people will see through that. But if you can do that genuinely for things you deeply believe in, I think a wonderful byproduct of that is that people say, whoa, who's this guy? Who's this gal? Like they care deeply. They're willing to say it how they see it. And I trust them more.
Sure.
So, yeah.
I think authenticity breeds trust in all areas. So I completely agree with you on that. I think that the more we can allow people into some of those more personal aspects of our mind, the more people feel like, okay, I can trust you. Even if I disagree with you, I can trust you because I know that you have opened up to me. And I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about the group itself, eCommerceFuel? I've mentioned a couple of the businesses that we're in. I want to talk about this a little bit. What are the benefits? Let's say if you're building a resilient brand, and I know this is going to feel like too promotional for you to even want to talk about, but I want to talk about it. So I'm the one bringing it up. In what way does being a part of a group like eCommerceFuel help to build a resilient business like this?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the mention and giving me the chance to talk about it. I think business is hard. E-commerce is hard. And it's been changing continually, since the dawn of time, but especially rapidly since, the e-commerce and the internet came on the scene. And we're kind of at the stage we've talked about a lot. I won't rehash it, but kind of coming into a new era, I believe, where you're building brands. And one of the best ways that you can kind of help calibrate and level up and be able to adapt to what's coming is by being able to talk to other people who are doing the similar thing, right? Like if you want to become a great rock climber, you don't go just in the woods by yourself. You go hang out at a rock jam with other people and you hang out with them and learn from them and get to know them. And they watch you climb up the wall. And when you fall off of stuff, they're like, hey, you missed this super easy hold you couldn't see around the corner, and you go up and do it again. And you make each other better, right? And so that's the entire point of e-commerce. So people will often ask me, like, especially when I'm meeting them for the first time, like, oh, hey, what do you do? And I kind of explain it to them, and they're like, so do you teach them? Are you like some weird guru that like teaches them all how to do this? And I'm like, no, I'm like the least, impressive person in this group. The whole point is we create this environment where we screen everyone that comes in to make sure that they're a 7 or 8 figure owner, that they're committed to reciprocity, that they have been in the trenches and are actually able and willing to share what's happening. And the value add you get is if you have questions about things, you get fast answers where there's not a lot of places as an e-commerce store owner. Let's say you're thinking about adopting a new AI platform for customer service. You go to your local chamber meeting in your city and ask that question, and people will look at you like you're crazy. You come and post, hey, I'm thinking about going to a help desk that has AI automation. What are the best ones out there? What should I think of? You post that, and within a day, you'll have many, many responses of people saying, this one's great, don't like this one, tried this one, was all right. And you can get very in-depth, very topical answers incredibly quickly. So that's the biggest part, and that helps you level up, be able to kind of go into this brave new world on all different facets of business with people who you can learn from and who can sharpen you.
Yeah. And I think that's the key is you've done a very good job of curating this. It is just people that are like similar in that means. You don't have service providers in there. I know because I've tried and you said no, and I tried again and you continued to say no. And so, but like, sorry. I respect No,
You're a
I
good man
felt
for
like I
having
had
me
a
on
lot
after
that I could offer in terms of help, but to your point that it's like, it's just the wrong kind of help. Like they just need to have this help because they can't trust the answer as much if it's coming from me. It has to come from somebody else in the group. And so I love that. You've stuck to it very well.
Oh, thanks. We didn't talk for years, probably as a result, and I appreciate the forgiveness that you've given me here. So thank you. I was
Not
waiting
at
for your
all.
call. Took 4 years, but finally it came.
No. I do want to get to know, speaking of, let's just say gaining trust and authenticity, I want to get to know the person of Andrew Youderian. Before we dig into the personal stuff, is there anything else professionally that we should be talking about that we're thinking about? Like, hey, we need to talk about this from a standpoint of, having the right goals in mind or the future of e-commerce and where we're going or things like that.
No, I think we covered a lot of good stuff and a lot of things that I like talking about. So, no, only other thing I'd mentioned that I forgot on that last question was the name of the community is eCommerceFuel. So if you're interested, eCommerceFuel.com. And then also, if you're a podcast listener, which you are, have been doing a podcast over there for a while. So you might find it interesting to do a lot of interviews with our members. But I think, yeah, in terms of other things to talk through, I don't think so. I think,
cool.
There's always things we could talk through, but I think those are the
Always.
big ones. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. So now we're getting into the good stuff here, the fun stuff. We were talking about this a little bit before, and I intentionally like to keep it a little bit more open. What about your childhood? How has your childhood helped to shape you into who you are?
Yeah, my therapist said you called him up and he sent over a bunch of notes for your prep. So this could get weird, but we'll go with it.
Yeah, Bill's a good guy. Yep, me and Bill, we go way back.
He is a quasi-therapist. How has the child? I would say, I grew up with a couple of amazing parents. My dad was a nuclear engineer. My mom stayed at home and had raised us. And I feel like from my dad, I learned how to work hard. Sometimes that was not fun, but he was someone who taught us integrity and working hard. My mom taught us entrepreneurship in her own special way. Like, and it's not necessarily a unique story, but when we were 10, she'd kind of like kick us outside. Probably the catalyst, my brother and I were probably fighting, and she was looking for any reason, any justification to throw us outside. I'm sure you can relate to this with three kids. And she's like, listen, go outside. You're not coming back for 4 hours. Don't come back until you've made like, $25 shoveling snow. Door slams, bam, behind us, right? So we go out and trudge through. We don't think it's going to work. And, you make some money out there. And that first, when you have $10 or $15 as like a 10-year-old, you feel like feel like the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right? You just feel flush with cash, like the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund. And so that kind of lit spark for entrepreneurship. There's a bunch of different things that has come from that, but that was probably the start. So great parents. I think another thing they taught me too was growing up, my parents were very frugal, not cheap, but frugal, like made a good income, but they intentionally socked away a very high percent of their income and lived well beneath their means for 15 to 20 years so that my dad could quit his engineering job, which was all consuming, to be able to go and do stuff they believed in. So they went and quit that, went and ran a homeless shelter for a while. He went and became like kind of a pastor later in life. And I didn't fully realize the intentionality with which they did that until a little later in life. But I thought it was so cool that they had such a long-term vision for what was important and kind of executed on it, and were willing to delay gratification. Like I remember one time we were rolling through this super nice part of town. It's called Stonebrook. And we're driving through, my mom was like, and this is probably when I was like 6, my mom was like, Andrew, you see all these nice houses? She's like, we could live in one of these nice houses, but then you would be grossly in debt when you went to college. And she just didn't say anything else, right? And like, this is what's going on in like 6-year-old Andrew's brain. And so that was very much a mentality of use money as a way to build opportunity and not as a way to like create standard of living or status. And I really appreciated that model.
That's beautiful. Some of the fun things that you like to do then, because it sounds like you had good parents, you like to be a good parent. We've talked about this, and you like to travel. And I understand there's a couple of interesting things that you have discovered in your travels. One of which I still don't even know if I'm going to pronounce it correctly. balut. Tell me about your time experience balut and what the heck balut even is.
Half the people are just kind of blinking. The other half are kind of gagging a little bit. Who knows what it is? Went to the Philippines recently for a couple different reasons. One of the reasons was to visit a team member that I've worked with for 15 years on my team and never met. It was super cool to meet her. And a balut is this Filipino, it's a delicacy, and is a duck egg that is fertilized, and the duck has been allowed to grow to like, I don't know, half maturity, a third of maturity, something like that. I'm not sure. But then it is boiled. It's a little cruel, to be honest. But it's boiled, and then you peel the egg and eat this duck embryo. That's like, and it's a thing that it's kind of thing where if you don't think about what you're eating, I think there's a lot of cultural things like this. Like there's a lot of things, even in America. Like if you really thought about this, you're like, we do what? This is weird. But yeah, it's a little gnarly because you're eating like bones and like a lot of times the feathers, things like that. Anyway, had the chance to experience that and was with some Filipinos, and they had asked if I wanted to try it, and I kind of demurred, and then they bought it, and I was like, I can't bail out now. This is, you're traveling when in Rome, so here we go. So that was a
so was it good?
Experience.
Would you get it again?
I'm not going to rush back to the Philippines to try it.
Okay.
If I went back next year, I would not do it again. In 5 years at a festival, if everyone was doing it again, I would do it. So,
is that the most interesting thing you've ever eaten?
Oh, hands down. Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing too that's cool is one of the reasons I did it too is my son, who is 6, was going to do it. And I was like, I can't let we have these 4 values in our family. Our 4 values are be kind, honest, hardworking, and brave. And like, if I'm going to tell my son he needs to be brave, and then his dad won't pony up and eat this weird thing that he's willing to eat, it doesn't really sync up. So, but the cool thing is now we have the story that we've done this together, that when when he's like 30, he will remember the time that he ate balut with his dad, and his dad was a wimp and did it with his eyes closed and he was eyes wide open, charging ahead like a pro. So
that's good. Well done. I've tried a lot of things. I have not tried balut. I would try it. I'll try just about anything.
What's the weirdest thing that you have eaten?
I don't know if this is the weirdest thing. My brother was in Shanghai, and when we went there, I had seen like the Beijing Olympics, right? Like a couple years before that. And so I was like, man, I really want to find like a scorpion on a stick. And we looked everywhere. We tried, could not find it anywhere. So it's like, that was just like for, TV. Like, I don't think it's a real thing. But he was like, well, this is the weirdest thing I can find for you. And it was stinky tofu, which is like a fermented tofu. And I couldn't get it down. Like I got like 3 or 4 pieces down. It was really bad. It was some of the worst food I've ever had in my life. And it's meant to be like, I think it's like a gag. I don't know if anybody actually eats it. I think it's just something they get like Americans when they come there.
Oh, I think balut might be the same way. I mean, I think they were gleeful watching this, this white dude from America trying to choke down balut and just, I think that was, I think they thoroughly enjoyed watching me squirt while I was eating it. So
that's a good experience with your son that you have now, but you've also got some experiences, I think, in an old Volkswagen van breaking down mechanics days. What's going on here?
Yeah, we had our first daughter, who is now 12. When we had her, 12 years ago, we went camping. I love getting outside and trying to explore and have fun. And we went camping with her, and it was, I don't know if you've ever been camping with a 12 to 18-month-old baby. Oh my!
I don't know if I have. Maybe
makes you never want to leave the house again, ever. It was awful. And so we quickly realized, like, hey, if we're going to try to get outside a lot with our family, we need to make it as seamless and streamlined as possible. And I've always loved these old. It's very cliche. I know there's probably a lot of people that roll their eyes here, but I've always loved those Vanagons from the 80s and early 90s.
Yes.
They're built like tanks, foot for foot. They are the most functional vehicles for interior living space. I'll do bike races sometimes with friends, and we can sleep 4 full-size adults with a stove, and also have a place to sit and hang out and talk and have beers in this thing that is about the size of a minivan. It's crazy how well it was engineered by the Germans. The downside is they're all old. They usually break down a lot, and they've got some issues. But we've had this for about 10 years. We've taken it on a bunch of adventures throughout the West. We've taken it to Canada. We've taken it to Mexico. And the kids love it. I've loved it, although it's been trying at times. And it's always an adventure. Sometimes the trip will go great. Sometimes, as in one year, we like went down to Joshua Tree. We're camping there. The engine blew up on a Friday at like 4 p.m. when all the shops closed. No. Right. And so we're stuck in this city, trying to get this thing fixed with like a 1 and a 3-year-old. We ended up like staying at the mechanic's house with like little kids and just insane. We look back at the pictures and it's like, what were we thinking? But it's been a really fun vehicle for creating memories, realizing that a lot of situations you get in, there's always a solution. You just have to be patient. It might be uncomfortable. It might be inconvenient. You always get through it. You always figure it out. And then you always have, oftentimes good stories from it. But yeah, it's been a fun part of our life and raising our kids.
I don't remember who did the study, but one of the guys at church told me that there was a study that was done that said one of the biggest common denominators between families that are close when they're older was whether or not they went camping together. And the hypothesis behind it is exactly what you just said, where it's like you're in close quarters, you have to figure out how to get along, and there's always something that goes wrong, so you have to figure out how to solve problems together. And that's like such an important thing to have to go through. And I like that. I don't remember if we ever did anything with like a 1.5-year-old, but we've done a bit of camping as well as a family, and it's a lot of fun. I can remember, the first time I think we set up a tent with them, like torrential downpour, and we're just like, okay, here we go. Like, how well is this going to hold up? Did we pick a good spot, or is it going to be, we're going to wake up, completely soaking? And it does create a lot of really fun memories.
And then he followed up that stat about the close families with, and also the families that are most likely to be estranged from each other are the ones that went camping a lot as young kids.
Maybe. I don't know. He didn't follow that. So, that was part B. It was on the B
part
side.
B. He left that part out.
Yeah. What about anything ever happened in Montana with handcuffs?
Dude, man. Did somebody sign off on these privacy things for like Freedom of Information Ask? Are we allowed to? Stuff?
Yeah, are we allowed to? I'm in your email.
Well,
it's all in ChatGPT now.
The one I will tell you about.
The one. There's more than one.
So I went to Montana State University here in Bozeman, and they have. I think a lot of universities have this. They have this tunnel system that goes all throughout the college. And one day when I was walking back to my apartment, I saw one of the little hatches. These hatches, they're kind of tucked away, but I saw one of these hatches that was loose, and I went over and tested it. And I was like, oh, sweet, this thing is open. And I've always wanted to see these things. So later that night at like midnight, I come back, I talk my roommate into going down in there with me. And we start going down, we sneak down and we hear some little noise and run away like, scared cats and hide in the bushes. And then we go down again, hear the same noise and run out again like a bunch of scared little wieners. And finally we go down a third time and we're exploring in there and I'm videotaping and stuff. And we hear footsteps. And anyway, there had been sensors on all the doors and they had to send some cops down in to flush us out. And because it was like a single cop, he's walking around, gun drawn, doesn't know who's down there, handcuffs us, walks us out. Tosses us in the back of a cop car. And I was actually less worried about any kind of legal consequences because we're not like robbing, we're not knocking over a bank. We're not kidnapping people. I'm like, this will probably just be a good story I can tell on a podcast in 20 years, The thing that worried me the most was I had a radio show, and because I was terrible, they put me at like the 3 a.m. spot in the morning. They did that for all the new DJs. And if you didn't show up to one time, you would really kill your credibility to get better spots. And we got like, I don't know if it was technically arrested, but thrown in the back of this cop car at like 1:30 in the morning. And I'm just thinking like, I have an hour and a half to figure out how to talk my way out of here. Anyway, it all worked out. They threatened to toss us in the clink. It didn't transpire, but it was totally worth it. Cool seeing the tunnels and a good bonding experience for me and my buddy.
It's so good. Those are some of the best memories. But I have to ask, you said you were recording this video with what? This was like, it sounds like you're talking pre-iPhone. You're talking there with like dude. A VHS camcorder.
Yeah, the Social Security is going to call me and ask me why my benefits haven't started after hearing this. It was like it was a tape, some kind of tape medium. And I had it down there. And the worst part, it's total old school, not digital, analog completely. And the next day I was telling the story to my friends and they're like, well, you were recording it, right? And I was like, yeah, but the police officer took my tape and I was like, well, but the cop took my tape and nobody believed me because they're like, it just sounds so fishy, right? Like it's like that kid in third grade who's like, yeah, I've got a tank in my garage. I'm just not going to show it to you kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. The amount of stuff that we got away with, even though back then, because social media didn't exist and everybody didn't have iPhones, is unreal.
Oh, I know. I'm very thankful that I feel like, I don't know how old you are. I'm 42. I don't think I would have picked a different time to be alive. Like growing up, born in 1982, in an analog childhood with the internet kind of maturing as I was getting in, late high school, early college, phone-free childhood, being able to leverage technology in the early days to build an internet business. Like, I mean, I am so thankful I was born when I was. Like, I don't think I'd change a thing.
I feel the same way. I'm 40, so your childhood is my childhood. Like it sounds very, very similar. And we literally saw everything happen. Like you said, we know what it was like to not have a computer in the house, and then to have one, and then that computer didn't really have internet, and then now the computer also has internet, and it's like before that all you had was Microsoft Paint, right? It's like that was it.
Yeah, it was just such a good time to be alive. Such a good trajectory. I'm thankful for it. It was awesome.
I agree. What about music? I understand that you're also a musician. What instruments do you play?
Man, you're going deep here. I love music. Enjoy playing it, although I'm not phenomenal at it. Guitar mostly is what I play. So, played guitar a lot in college. Have picked it up a little bit. The big lull kind of in my 20s when doing a lot of work and getting busy. Kind of talking about those buckets that suffer. Picked it up a little bit more. In recent years, especially fun with kids. It's really fun to play with kids, for playing them to sleep, to playing music, to teaching them as well. And yeah, music is just something that, for me in particular, but I think for a lot of people, it's hard to have a terrible day when you have listened to a lot of good music. And sometimes I can be very guilty about, I'm guessing I'm the only one listening that's going to suffer from this, but listening to like 100 business podcasts in a row, or like reading my 5th business book, right?
Sure.
And like those are important and those are super good. But man, sometimes you need to just turn off the business stuff and crank up a little bit of really good music. And it's medicine. It's amazing how it can be a mood enhancer. It can make an average day a great day. It can make a crappy day an average day, which is pretty cool. And playing music with people live or together, there's something primal and wonderful and really cool about it.
What do you consider to be really good music? When you say like, hey, cranking up some really good music, what are we talking here?
Oh, we're talking TLC, Waterfalls.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Don't go chase waterfalls.
I bring that up just only because that was a karaoke song I sung recently in the Philippines.
Oh, nice.
A good music. I like a lot of everything. I think like a lot of people, I am, what you grew up with and what you listened to in college is a lot of what you easily fall back into. Mm-hmm. So I liked Dispatch. I liked Collective Soul. I liked Coldplay. I like Neil Young. I like more modern stuff. One thing I have been bad about is keeping up on more modern music, and I need to do that. I like funk music a lot, like James Brown. I like B.B. King, so blues. It's kind of a smattering of a lot of different things, but I would say in general, 90s rock, funk, and blues, and anything EDM. Like I work really well at EDM, totally. So anything in those genres, I'm a happy man.
You have young kids still. I mean, I still consider kids to be young in this grand scheme of things. And so, you lose a decade or two of what's cool during that period of time. Cause I feel like, you're listening to the wheels on the bus go round and round and round and round and round and round. And whatever they end up listening to, or you definitely change your music taste. You're like, I need to not listen to that song. Let's listen to something else.
I'm the dad who gets in the car and my wife has had like the wheels on the bus go round and round. And she's not with me, and I pop it out and I turn on like, I don't know, some AC/DC, and the kids, are kind of a little looking around a little bit. So the kids I usually change it up, and But yes, there's a lot more of the wheels on the bus than there was in the 20s for sure.
I don't know if you know who DC Talk is. Do you know who DC Talk is as a group?
I do know who DC Talk is. Yes, I definitely listened to them in my late teens.
Yeah. So my daughter, who's 9, she's been learning one of the songs from Free at Last. And she was like, I want to be the girl version of DC Talk when I grow up. I'm, like, I'm so proud of that because I'm like, I loved DC Talk as a kid. I'm like, you can do it. And I support you.
That's awesome. That's really cool. You'll probably know this then too. I was, Jars of Clay was another band that was popular kind of in that genre at the same time. And I remember when I was maybe mid-20s, late 20s, and I heard they were coming to a city near me. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. I'm going to go. So we went and I show up and like, I'm out there, I'm listening to them and it's really fun, but I'm like kind of surprised because there's not that many people there. And then they wrap up and I'm getting ready to go home. And then a ton of people flood in and this other band shows up and starts playing. And what I realized was they were like the opening act and nobody knew who they were. And I was like, this is not a good sign. It was similar to when I was up skiing this weekend. And I looked up on the wall and there are the skis I was skiing in college. And they have now mounted them as antique skis up on the wall. I'm like, these are not good road markers for what lies ahead.
Good. Yeah. That's good. One of the things that you and I were talking about before too is that we both love to invest. It's just like let's almost call it a hobby, if you were. What are some of the things that you like to invest in? Like, what are your thoughts overall with where we're going right now?
Yeah, that's such a big question. I would say, where do I like to invest? Maybe I'll start with investing in mistakes. I have tried to time the market in the past. I think this is one of those areas where all of the advice that you get, it's repeated so frequently, it sounds so obvious, but the trick is actually in doing it. Again, going back to the Psychology of Money book, he talks so much about how money is not knowledge; it's psychology and behavior, and it's one of the few areas where like beginners and the novices can beat the pros if they just can master a few psychological and behavioral tricks. Like you don't. It's more about. It's less about expertise and more about behavior. So I would say in the past I have thought I was very smart and would try to time the market. So I'd take, have like an investment fund or money in a brokerage fund, and I'd it'd be in some ETF, and I'd sell it all because I think the market's going to crash. And the market would crash by 10%, and I'd feel brilliant, and then it would shoot up 30%, and I'd feel like an idiot and lose out on everything. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I have. Just man, if you just buy. Invest in broad ETFs or broad indexes that cover the US market, the S&P 500 or the total Vanguard index, and just invest every month and just leave them. You're going to be so hard pressed to beat, especially from a if you're weighing the effort and energy you'd have to go to find other investments. That's the biggest mistake I've made. I like to take an approach of kind of a diversified approach. I'd say, like, if you look at my investments, liquid or just non-real estate, probably 80%, I'd say probably 70% stocks, index funds, maybe 5% individual stocks, maybe 75, and a little smattering of maybe 5% private investments, and then maybe 15 to 20% crypto, which is pretty high. And I think I like to take an approach that is more focused on very proven index markets, and then trying to pick things that you think have on the barbell approach. And I didn't come up with this term either, but they can really, that you have a high degree of conviction in, and you have an unfair edge on. I think stock picking in general is not a great, thing to do. But for example, you and I with Shopify, I was talking earlier about how I was working with Shopify early on, and I remember thinking at one of the Unite conferences, I should really buy their stock. It's a great team, a great company. I'm migrating to them. Everyone's talking about them and loving them. But I remember thinking, oh, they're at $30 a share. They IPO'd at 20. I'm going to wait till they go down a little bit. And then, they 20 or 30x from there. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think the mistakes I have made are trying to overcomplicate things, not betting heavily where I have an unfair edge, or unfair advantage, which I did in that case. And I think the third one was private investments. I've tried to invest for a short period of time ran a very small investment fund. It was an investment syndicate where I got, had 15 investors came in. We kind of pooled together deals. I ran them and took a cut. And those did well. And by well, I mean, they probably beat the markets by, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 percentage points every year. So they were a good investment, but the amount of time and energy and effort it took, particularly because we weren't investing large sums, it was a lot of work for not a lot of payoff. So I found it was difficult to invest. We were writing checks with our syndicate of maybe in the, let's say, the $500,000 to $700,000 range, and that was a hard for minority positions. In some of them in all of them for minority positions, and it was just a hard way to make money. So
sure, yeah. To your point, I'd say that I subscribe to the same model of dollar cost average into ETFs being still one of the best things that you can do. And then I have what I would say is like the fun investing, where it's like, it's good, but it's just not fun. Well, then there's like other things, like you said, where it's like, I really like getting into IPOs or close thereafter of companies that I just think are going to do well and then just buy and hold. And so Shopify is one of them that it's like, got into that, I mean, basically right when they launched, and have held and bought more and will continue to hold, because I still think, when I look at e-commerce as a percentage of total retail sales, it's about like 17%. And so you think this has still got a lot of room to grow, and they are positioned in a very good spot to be at the forefront of this.
Yeah, totally agree. And one thing I think too is your investment antenna gets better over time. You have to learn to pattern match. When you're early on investing, you don't have the track record of saying, oh, I wanted to invest in this and this did really well. I had a lot of conviction here, it didn't do well. Ooh, I was skeptical about this and it bombed. Or I wanted to do this one and this one bombed. You learning to trust yourself or realize where you're making bad decisions is, I think, a really important part of just maturing and getting better as an investor. And it's hard to do. It takes longer the less you're making individual investments, which I think is probably a good thing, right? Like, I think if you're in your 20s and you're making dozens and dozens of individual investments, I think you're probably doing things suboptimally unless you have a wild edge on something that I'm not thinking of. But part of it is it just takes time for your brain to be able to figure out where you have competency with 2020 hindsight looking back and where you don't.
Sure. Just want to clarify, this is not official investment advice. Talk to your financial planner. Neither one of us are financial planners, blah, 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 all that disclaimer stuff. But that said, Andrew, I do want to thank you. I mean, we're at the top of this time, and I just can't even imagine. This has been very nice, very good talking to you, learning from you, both from professional and personal side of things. And so just excited to have had you on here, man.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the invite. It's been good getting to know you over the years, even, in our dark period when you wouldn't speak to me. And
that's never been true. Just so we're clear.
But no, man, it's a pleasure to be on. I really appreciate you having me on the show. Thank you. I'm excited to see how it continues to grow and evolve for you.
Yeah. And you pointed us towards eCommerceFuel. That said, if people want to follow you, what's the best way for them to follow you?
Yeah, if you're a Twitter person, at Youderian is where I post the most, Youderian. eCommerceFuel.com is where you can learn about the community and apply to join if you're interested. The eCommerceFuel podcast is where I put out a weekly show about all things e-commerce and life and business and relationships. I think those are probably the best places.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your time and knowledge and sharing that all with us. And thank you everyone for listening. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.